Ever since he was little, Arhan had heard a legendary story about his family from his father. Standing before the portrait of an ancient warrior, he was reminded that, as the heir to House Caravan, he should never forget his origins. Even though they now lived in a small territory far from the capital, the Caravans had once been admired throughout the entire world around 2 centuries ago. The family was made up of knights known as warlords, righteous guardians favored by the king and celebrated by everyone. House Caravan was also said to have been chosen by the sword, producing master swordsmen for several generations, and that was how their name came to be known with great reverence. House Caravan became known as the Invincible Guardians. Arhan's father told him that one day he would inherit his position as the next lord of the family and, while holding the boy by the shoulders, taught him to always take pride in the steel blood flowing through his veins. Arhan's father also told him that he had to restore the honor and prestige of the Caravan name, allowing the family to reclaim its rightful place as the righteous guardian of those lands. That was the mission the Caravans were meant to fulfill. Years later, Arhan lives among the vast wheat fields of the region. Even while working on the harvest, he still remembers the heroic stories about his ancestors that he had heard ever since he was little. Arhan eventually came to regard those stories as nothing more than fabrications used by fallen noble families to embellish the glories of their past. As far as he was concerned, if all of that were really true, the Caravans would not be ruling over such a modest village, while he himself worked in the fields harvesting crops. Arhan also questioned why he spent his days working in the fields alongside the villagers themselves. After telling them where they should place the harvested crops, he realizes that this is not the only flaw in his father's stories and remembers the founder of House Caravan, the man whose portrait still hangs in the main hall. The founder depicted in the portrait bears no resemblance whatsoever to Arhan or his father, and even the ancestral sword preserved in the manor looks far too sharp to have been forged centuries ago. More importantly, Arhan has already researched the kingdom's historical records and found no mention whatsoever of the family's supposed founder, Liam Caravan. With all these inconsistencies, Arhan reaches a conclusion. The stories about the Caravans were nothing more than lies invented and passed down through generations to feed the family's pride. His thoughts are interrupted when one of the villagers calls him over for lunch, warning him that if he takes too long, there will not be any steamed buns left for him. When one of the villagers jokes that he intends to eat all the buns, Arhan runs over, so he will not be left without any, leaving the others arguing over the food. In the end, he does not care that House Caravan is no longer a respected noble family and continues living normally alongside the people of the village. To Arhan, the residents of Caravan are like family, and he genuinely enjoys spending his days beside them. Because of that, he runs to join the villagers, satisfied with the life he has and hoping that everything will continue just as it is. Later, Arhan would realize just how naive he had been to believe that this life would continue that way. At the end of the day, after they finish harvesting the crops, he tells the villagers that he will ride to the market in the neighboring village and offers to bring back anything they might need. Arhan offers an apple to Kuna, who had constantly been complaining about wanting one, and also remembers that the birthday of Marino's youngest daughter is approaching, promising to buy her a doll if he finds a pretty one. He knew the residents well and said that was only natural, since he would eventually become the next lord of Caravan. Arhan then says goodbye to the residents, telling them that he will be back soon, and rides away on horseback while everyone wishes the young master a safe journey. After Arhan leaves, the residents comment that they have been blessed to have such a kind young master and even begin worrying about whether his future wife will be good enough for him. Afterward, they decide to return to work and finish the harvest before it gets too late. The villagers also mention that they need to meet with Lord Caravan to discuss something, but their conversation is interrupted when Kun is suddenly struck and his blood splashes across the others. Unable to understand what just happened, Marino stares at him in shock and calls out to him. Marino remains unable to understand what has just happened. Soon afterward, an armed figure walks through the fields and declares that those lands must be completely wiped out. The figure approaches the villagers, who seem to recognize him. He then stops in front of them, draws his sword, and mentions the name Caravan. Without giving them any chance to react, the invader swings his sword and cuts down the villagers all at once. Covered in the blood of his victims, he continues toward the village, declaring that Caravan must be erased from existence. Arhan returns and finds the supplies scattered across the ground and the villagers lying dead along the road. Unable to understand what happened to everyone, he remains frozen before the scene until a man approaches him from behind, covers his eyes, and asks the young master not to look. Arhan recognizes the man's voice as that of his butler, but realizes that something is wrong when he sees him crying and asks him to say that all of this is nothing more than a dream. Unable to hold back his tears, Arhan asks about the villagers and what happened to all of them. The butler explains that a man appeared in Caravan and declared that the family should be erased from existence. Without any warning, the invader needed only 10 minutes to attack the place, causing the residents to flee in desperation. In just 10 minutes, the invader uses his sword to take the lives of half the residents and even destroys part of the village with his strikes. Standing before one of his victims, he states that he is merely carrying out an order. And so, half of Caravan's residents were brutally massacred by that unexpected calamity caused by a single master swordsman, while the village was consumed by flames. In the middle of that calamity, Arhan returns to the manor and finds the hall covered in blood and bodies. Walking among the dead, he stops in front of one of them and raises his hands to his head, while the pendants around his neck begin to glow. Arhan hears someone calling his name and, when he raises his head, sees his mother standing alive before him. Unable to believe what he is seeing, he clings to the only hope he still has left and runs to embrace her. Arhan's mother holds him tightly, relieved to find him unharmed. For a moment, the warmth of that embrace brings some relief, but Arhan soon notices something and freezes when he sees a figure standing in front of them. Amid all that tragedy, Arhan's father remains on his knees in the blood, repeatedly asking why any of this is happening. But that scene makes it clear that the tragedy of Caravan is only beginning. The master swordsman who massacred half of Caravan spared Arhan's parents for an unknown reason and left them with only a warning. He would return in 1 month, and if they wanted to survive, they would have to abandon those lands and take all the remaining residents with them. Without receiving any explanation, Arhan's father continues asking why this was done to them. Desperate, he demands to know what crimes the Caravans could possibly have committed to deserve such a massacre, but the swordsman remains standing before him without answering. The swordsman only responds that he was following an order and leaves without giving any further explanation. After that, the survivors of the massacre begin abandoning Caravan one by one, taking whatever remains of their belongings with them. Leaving Caravan was the only way for the survivors to remain alive, but that option never even crossed the minds of Arhan's family. His father remained inside the manor, repeatedly telling himself that he was a great knight, a guardian of the kingdom with steel blood flowing through his veins. Arhan's father convinces himself that his mission is to defeat the great evil that will return and refuses to run away, even while being crushed by the guilt of having failed to protect anyone. Meanwhile, his mother goes looking for Arhan and reveals that she ordered the butler to prepare a carriage, asking her son to leave those lands with him and travel as far away as possible. Arhan asks his mother to go with him and believes they could still convince his father to leave as well. However, she explains that the Lord of Caravan will not abandon those lands and intends to face the enemy until the very end. As his wife, she also decides to remain by his side until their final moments. Arhan begs his mother to change her mind and leave with him, but she asks her son to listen carefully. She then reveals that the stories his father told him about the righteous and invincible guardians were never true, and were nothing more than lies disguised as history. Arhan's mother asks him to make just one promise: never wield a sword and continue living, no matter what happens. She also asks him to forget any thoughts of revenge and start living only for himself, without carrying anyone else's burdens. At that moment, the butler arrives and announces that the carriage is ready. Arhan's mother entrusts her son to his care and orders the two of them to travel as far away as possible before the swordsman returns. Arhan tries to resist and begs her to come with them, but the butler holds on to him and begins taking him away. Arhan continues calling out for his mother as the butler drags him away, insisting that they need to leave immediately. Without following them, she simply watches her son being taken away and says goodbye, telling him how much she loves him. Back at the manor, Arhan's father enters the library alone and walks toward one of the bookshelves. Overcome with tears, he slams his own head against the wood and remains standing there in front of it. Arhan's mother finds her husband alone in the library and embraces him from behind, telling him that he no longer needs to suffer alone. Determined to remain by his side, she says that she will stay with him until the final moments of both their lives. That very same night, the butler takes Arhan far away from Caravan in a carriage. Along the way, he acknowledges the young man's suffering, but tells him that Arhan needs to overcome everything that happened, because the man who attacked the village is a true calamity, and ordinary people have no way of confronting someone at that level. The butler tries to convince Arhan that only by accepting the tragedy of that day will he be able to move forward, saying that his parents surely want that for him. However, Arhan refuses to abandon the two of them and jumps out of the carriage, running back toward Caravan. Arhan refuses to run away and races back to Caravan. Even though he knows that master swordsmen possess strength comparable to that of gods, he believes they can still die like anyone else if they are struck in the heart, so he takes a crossbow with him. Arhan had spent the last month obtaining a deadly poison to use on his arrows. He believes that if he manages to hit the swordsman, he will be able to kill him and save his parents, so he makes his way back to Caravan. Arhan finds another dead man tied to a wooden stake and freezes at the sight. After realizing what has happened all around him, he understands that the tragedy has spread throughout the entire village. The swordsman realizes that Arhan chose to return even after being given the chance to escape and turns toward him. Arhan stops in front of his parents' bodies and, upon seeing them lying on the ground, screams and refuses to accept what is before him. Arhan stares at his fallen mother and confirms that she does not respond. Consumed by rage, he draws the weapon he had prepared and aims it directly at the swordsman, swearing that he will kill him. The man simply watches Arhan in silence, keeping his eyes fixed on him. Arhan fires, but the swordsman cuts down the projectile before it can reach him, causing the weapon to fall to the ground. Unable to attack him, Arhan runs toward his fallen mother and kneels beside her while the man begins to walk away. Soon afterward, Arhan raises a hand to his neck and begins to tremble. The swordsman approaches and realizes that Arhan has not yet turned 18. Because of that, he decides to spare his life, but orders him to abandon those lands and allow the caravan name to disappear. Before leaving, he also warns that if Arhan tries to continue the caravan bloodline, he will come back for him. The swordsman reinforces his warning that he will return if Arhan tries to preserve the caravan bloodline and then walks away, leaving the young man behind. Unable to do anything, Arhan crawls toward his mother, holds her body in his arms, and cries over her. His screams are eventually heard by someone watching the scene from afar. Arhan believes that he lost everything that day, but his family's sword begins to emit a blue light before him. As he approaches it, he hears a voice calling his name and telling him to stand with dignity as a caravan. Blue energy begins to surround Arhan and spreads out before the portrait of the family's founder. Then, the figure of his ancestor emerges from within the light and calls Arhan his noble descendant. Arhan spends the following year preparing himself to take revenge on the most powerful swordsman in the kingdom, known as the Guardian of Peace, and one of the righteous watchers responsible for eliminating evil. Among the records he finds, he discovers that his enemy is considered a superhuman and one of the most brilliant swordsmen in the kingdom. The man who destroyed everything was named Carlos, known as the Master of 10 Swords. Arhan manages to discover his name and reputation, but he still finds no answers about the reason behind the massacre, who might have been behind that order, or what secrets the Caravan bloodline was hiding. There was only one certainty. Among the residents of Caravan who survived the massacre, not a single one returned to those lands. Arhan remained there alone, until, one day, a strange blue light appeared inside the manor. Arhan begins to think that he might be losing his mind after spending so much time searching for answers, but the blue energy before him grows increasingly intense. Then, from within the light, the figure of a man appears, calling Arhan by name and recognizing him as his noble descendant. Standing before Arhan was someone he had believed existed only in his family's ancient stories, the legendary founder of House Caravan. Arhan remembers hearing that people marked by severe trauma can see illusions, but the figure before him seems far too real to be a hallucination. Then, the founder notices Arhan's condition and says that he can sense the turmoil within his heart. The founder notices Arhan's hesitation and asks whether he fears that he has lost his mind or whether he is simply too surprised to speak in front of someone he had considered nothing more than a legend. Arhan then asks whether this is really happening and confirms whether the man standing before him is Liam Caravan, the founder of House Caravan and the man known as the greatest swordsman of all time. After confirming that the man truly is the legendary founder of the family, Arhan demands to know why he had never appeared before. His anger grows, and he questions why Liam did not show himself sooner. Liam explains that he only appeared now because he needed to be certain of Arhan's conviction. Over the past year, he watched the boy prepare himself for revenge, even though he knew that his skill with the sword was still inferior. Even so, Arhan continued training without giving up the weapon, and that persistence ultimately proved his determination. Liam reveals that he observed Arhan's willpower and saw that his determination remained firm throughout all that time. That was why he had not appeared sooner. He was waiting until the hatred in the boy's eyes reached the level he wanted. Liam admits that he can no longer contain his own desire to put an end to the man who massacred his children and the residents of Caravan. He then explains that throughout the history of those lands, there is one truth that has always endured through the passage of time. Liam explains that only a swordmaster is capable of killing another swordmaster, and that Arhan continued training precisely because he knew this and wanted to avenge his family. However, if he continues training alone, he will never be able to reach Carlos's level of strength, because swordmasters exist far beyond ordinary human capabilities, and even great prodigies cannot easily reach that level. Liam explains that even among swordmasters themselves, Carlos stands far above the others, being one of the most powerful of them all. Even during the era in which Liam lived, warriors of that level were extremely rare, and currently there is no one capable of defeating him. To make matters worse, as time passes, Carlos continues to grow even stronger. Arhan already knew that he was still far from possessing enough strength to confront Carlos, but hearing that defeating him would be impossible makes him question the entire path he has chosen. He refuses to accept that all he can do is watch helplessly, while the man who took everything from him continues to be treated as a hero, once again remembering the moment when he was unable to do anything to stop the tragedy. But Liam declares that from that moment onward, everything will change. He will help Arhan become a swordmaster even more powerful than Carlos, giving the boy the chance to one day defeat him with his own hands. However, there is only one way to obtain that power, and only an heir of the Caravan bloodline can follow that path. Liam reveals that, as an heir of the steel blood, Arhan must devour his sword. The weapon is then taken to a forge, where it begins to be heated by the flames, while Liam explains that the blood of the Caravans is different from that of everyone else. Arhan takes the sword to the forge and begins heating it directly in the flames. Beside him, Liam explains that this special blood was passed down from him, as he himself was only a half-dwarf. Liam explains that although his descendants do not display the physical characteristics of dwarves, his blood passed a special ability down through the Caravan bloodline. This power allows them to consume weapons, especially swords, and inherit the memories and abilities of their former owners, making those memories and abilities part of the user himself. Liam reveals that this ability was the foundation that allowed House Caravan to produce several sword masters throughout the generations and earn tremendous renown. Upon understanding that he will need to devour a sword in order to inherit its power, Arhan finds the method strange, since he had only known about the dwarves' affinity with iron and fire and had never heard of an ability like this. Even though he finds everything absurd and confusing, Arhan decides that the only way to discover the truth is to move forward. No longer able to hesitate, he accepts the path Liam has shown him and asks his ancestor to teach him how to devour the sword. Liam explains that the process is simple. Arhan needs to heat the sword until its blade becomes incandescent and then devour it. Standing before the burning weapon, Arhan still considers the possibility that everything might be a nightmare or that he could be under some kind of spell, but he decides to continue. Even when faced with something so absurd, Arhan decides to cling to whatever small hope might still exist amid his despair. Determined to obtain the power necessary for his revenge, he brings the incandescent blade toward his mouth and begins to devour the sword. As soon as he bites into the incandescent sword, flames engulf Arhan's body and begin burning him violently. He screams in pain as his entire body is consumed by fire, until he can no longer endure it and collapses to the ground. Lying on the ground, Arhan writhes in pain, but the memories of the massacre return to his mind. He remembers the bodies scattered throughout the village, his dead parents, and finally, Carlos's face, reminding him of the reason that brought him this far. Arhan forces himself to continue and bites into the heated sword once again, even as the heat burns his mouth. Willing to keep moving forward even if it costs him his life, he keeps the blade between his teeth and decides that he will become a swordmaster in order to kill Carlos. The following morning, Arhan wakes up lying on the ground and suddenly rises to his feet. Still breathing heavily, he realizes that he survived the process and confirms that he is still alive. Arhan realizes that, in addition to being alive, his body does not have a single burn, even though he can still clearly remember the pain of swallowing the incandescent metal. Thinking that everything might have been nothing more than a dream, he quickly dismisses that possibility when he finds only the sword's hilt lying on the ground, with no trace whatsoever of the rest of the blade. At that moment, the voice of his ancestor appears once again, praising Arhan's determination despite his body still being fragile. He explains that other members of the Caravan bloodline had already tried to devour swords, but ended up giving up because they could not endure the pain caused by the burning metal. The ancestor then asks whether Arhan finally believes his words, stating that all the stories told by his father were true and that his appearance before him was not simply an illusion. Arhan then formally introduces himself and bows before the founder of the Caravan bloodline. In response, his ancestor simply asks that, from that moment onward, he call him Master. Arhan begins calling him Master and, after better understanding what happened, asks whether by devouring the sword, he also inherited the great strength his father had spoken about so often, along with the power that the founder himself possessed. Arhan finds it strange that he does not feel any change in his body, and the master admits that a problem has appeared. His plan had been to make the boy devour his most valuable sword in order to raise his power directly to the level of a sword master. The master explains that his sword lost a great deal of its power over the generations, leaving Arhan able to absorb only a small portion of its strength. Because of that, in his current state, it would be impossible for him to completely consume the essence of that blade. At that moment, blue energy begins concentrating inside the boy's body. Even with that limitation, Arhan accepts his master's explanation without questioning it. The founder finds the boy's calm reaction strange and asks whether that is really all he has to say. Arhan acknowledges the limitations of his own body, and, although he was unable to obtain all of the power at once, he is satisfied to have discovered a new possibility. After all, if completely absorbing the sword's strength is impossible only because of his current condition, that means he will be able to reach that power in the future once he becomes stronger. Arhan concludes that he can search for other swords more compatible with his current abilities and absorb them in order to gradually increase his strength. After realizing that the boy quickly understood how to make use of his new ability, the master smiles and praises his intelligence. The master decides to begin the training with old and worn-out swords, taking Arhan to a place filled with discarded weapons. Faced with the enormous number of blades scattered across the area, he begins searching for one suitable for the boy to consume. The master explains that this scrapyard receives every kind of old object from the poorer areas, ranging from worthless junk to weapons that are no longer useful for anything. Because of that, the place is perfect for searching for a sword that meets the necessary conditions, and Arhan agrees that it is a good place to start. The master tells him that he also began his training by devouring weapons found in places scarred by battles. Among swords still trapped in the hands of dead soldiers, axes covered in blood and dirt, and broken spears, he consumed every blade he was able to find. He explains that he devoured all of those weapons in order to become stronger and survive. As he looks around at the scrapyard, the master ends up remembering that period of his own training. The master recalls a time when warriors fought endlessly for their own survival, leaving countless dead across the battlefields, while others managed to live for one more day. In the middle of so many conflicts, countless lives disappeared, without leaving any trace behind, but some managed to leave something behind. Among the countless abandoned objects, one of the weapons gives off an intense glow, catching the master's attention. As soon as he finds it, he points toward the weapon and orders Arhan to retrieve it. The master reveals that this will be the second sword Arhan must consume. 1 month later, Arhan arrives during the night at a completely abandoned village and heads toward an equally empty manor, with no one anywhere nearby. After entering the manor, Arhan and the others consider the possibility that the place may have been used by a dark mage to conduct experiments, but they dismiss the idea because they are still alive. Observing the well-preserved interior and the quality of the furniture, they begin to believe that the property once belonged to some noble who fell from grace. Unable to find anyone responsible for the manor, the group believes they will be able to loot the place without any difficulty and begins searching through the rooms. A short while later, one of them finds something unexpected and tells the others that a noblewoman is still living on the property. After finding women's dresses that appear to have been stored away recently, the intruders become convinced that a woman still lives in the manor. One of them even smells one of the garments, while another runs over, wanting to do the same. At that moment, a voice interrupts the group, and Arhan appears before the intruders. Upon seeing the clothes scattered around, he remembers how his mother always kept everything organized and could not stand seeing her belongings left in disorder. Arhan orders them to put down the clothes and proposes settling the situation through conversation. The intruders realize that he is just a boy and begin questioning who he is, while Arhan asks whether they are only there looking for food or if they also need a place to stay. Arhan says that if they are looking for food or shelter, he can receive them as their host. The bald man rejects the offer, advances toward him, and threatens to make him regret acting with so much confidence. The man charges at Arhan and raises his arm to crush him with a blow. Arhan remains standing still in front of him and, at the moment of the attack, dodges the strike and hits his opponent, violently sending him crashing into the wall. Arhan's strike lands directly on the man, causing blood to spray as he coughs it up. Arhan then states that they are not travelers looking for shelter, but a group of outlaws. Standing before the furnace, Arhan receives from his master the next weapon he must devour. When he picks it up, he notices that it is extremely thin and comments that, rather than a sword, it looks more like a needle. Arhan observes that the weapon would probably break if he tried to cut anything with it. The master confirms this and explains that it was not created to cut or destroy something through force, because it has only one single purpose. The master explains that the sword was created specifically to pierce vital points in life or death situations, penetrating the enemy with a single precise strike. Arhan questions whether a spear would not be more suitable for piercing, but the master understands his doubt and explains that, because of the boy's fragile body, what matters most are the memories and abilities stored within that sword. The master then reveals that the sword's previous owner killed more than 200 enemies before dying, even though she was a small woman with a body even more fragile than Arhan's. The master instructs Arhan to respect that sword and devour it with gratitude, because despite being extremely light, it carried the strength and life of its former owner. By inheriting that woman's memories, he could learn a great deal from her. As he absorbs the memories of the sword's former owner, Arhan sees the final moment she was able to remember, her home being consumed by flames. At 10 years old, Mary wakes up injured and discovers that her life had completely changed, while the bodies of her parents were so badly burned that they could no longer be recognized. Mary had been the only survivor of the fire, barely escaping with her life. Still lying down and covered in injuries, she wished that she had died alongside her parents. After losing everything, the girl was sent to a decaying orphanage, where she would eventually discover something. At the orphanage, Mary discovers that everyone worshipped the goddess of fire as their savior. After losing everything precisely because of the flames, she begins living surrounded by people who worshipped fire, remaining trapped by the memories of that blaze. Mary's days at the orphanage alternated between peaceful and cruel moments. During prayers, the other children whispered about the scar on her face, spreading rumors that she had been cursed by the goddess and showing disgust whenever they looked at her. The insults directed at Mary continued, with the other children calling her hideous, disgusting, a freak, and a monster. Without reacting, she remained alone and spent every day wishing that death would come for her as quickly as possible. Mary wanted to escape both the memories of the fire that left the scar on her face and the contempt she faced every day, until, on a certain night, she finds a sword and sees in it a way to continue enduring that life. Mary finds comfort in learning the sword. Even though she begins with crude techniques, that alone is already enough for her, and her training begins to be guided by Hegel, a former wandering knight who had worked at the orphanage for years. Even though she is hesitant to approach someone with such a severe appearance, Mary gathers her courage, walks over to Hegel, and asks him to accept her as his student. Mary repeats her request for Hegel to teach her, but he responds that knowing how to wield a sword is not enough to survive, especially for a girl like her. Hegel insists that she would only end up getting herself hurt and tells Mary to leave. Even so, she refuses to give up and says that if she learns how to use a sword, she will be able to defend herself. Mary states that if she learned how to use a sword, there would be no fire anywhere in the world that she would ever need to fear. Then, she bows before Hegel, maintaining her request to be trained. Faced with Mary's persistence, Hegel places several swords in front of her and tells her to choose one, saying that he will agree to teach her if she can handle it. The girl looks at the weapons and asks whether she really needs to swing the sword, prompting Hegel to ask what else she intends to do with one. Mary chooses one of the swords and says that anything will do as long as she can fight with it. To demonstrate this, she points the blade directly at Hegel's neck, showing that she intends to use it to pierce her opponent rather than simply swing it at him. The memory reveals that this same piercing technique was the way Mary wielded a sword for the very first time. Back in the present, the attack brings down the man who was advancing toward him, leaving the other intruders frozen after witnessing the scene. During that month, Hegel had not taught Arhan any sword techniques and had only made him run for hours to strengthen his body. Because of that, after seeing him strike a vital point with such precision, he concludes that the boy's body is correctly absorbing the abilities contained within the swords. With the sword in hand, Arhan prepares to fight, while his master waits to witness the first steps of the heir of House Caravan. Arhan realizes that he has just pierced precisely through the space between two of the intruder's ribs, striking the lung directly. Without any combat experience or sword technique of his own, he understands that he could never have performed such a precise attack by himself. Arhan realizes that this precision came from Mary's memories, the former owner of the sword he had consumed. After that day, Hegel begins teaching him many other things. With Hegel, Arhan learns how to properly wield a sword, use it in combat, and, above all else, survive. His teachings did not follow traditional fundamentals, but instead consisted of techniques acquired over the many years he traveled across different lands as a wandering knight. For Mary, who had spent her entire life fearing fire, nothing was more beautiful than the freedom found within Hegel's swordsmanship. That was what made her fall in love with that way of fighting with a sword. Several years pass, and Hegel is already bedridden, coughing heavily. With Mary by his side, he tells her that one day she will leave that place, and asks that, when that moment comes, she go out and discover the vastness of the world. Hegel reveals that this will be his final lesson and says that he is grateful to have met Mary at the end of his journey. Still holding her hand, he says goodbye, while affectionately calling her by name. After Hegel's death, Mary thanks him for everything, and says farewell to her master. Fulfilling his final wish, she leaves the orphanage behind and sets out into the world alone, where it does not take long for her to build a reputation as a mercenary. Because she used a sword as thin as a needle and was also a young female mercenary, something uncommon in that world, Mary eventually became known as the Needle Maiden. As he approaches the wounded man, the boy realizes that the absorption his master had mentioned has begun. Mary's memories start appearing in his mind, while the intruder lying on the ground begs to be spared. Even with the intruder begging for his life, the boy strikes him again to make sure he is dead. After killing him, he realizes that this was the first time he had ever taken the life of another human being. Even after killing someone for the first time, the boy feels nothing, as though he had already done it countless times before. He then realizes that he was able to take precise advantage of the intruder's opening because he had been underestimated, but now he needs to deal with the other men who are still inside the manor. The boy believes that the others should also understand their numerical advantage, but he finds it strange when all of them charge toward him at once. At that moment, his master realizes the reason: the intruders are afraid. The master explains that the boy's movement was far from resembling that of a beginner. The intruders' fear ends up distorting the image they have of their opponent even further, causing them to see him as a much greater threat and lose the ability to act clearly. Understanding the situation, the boy decides to use that fear to his advantage and strengthen the image of himself as a skilled and deadly killer. Without hesitation, he quickly advances toward the intruders with his sword in hand. The boy waits for the right moment to attack, but one of the intruders reacts and tries to strike him with his weapon. He dodges the blow and quickly changes position, escaping the opponent's reach. After avoiding the attack, the boy strikes another one of the intruders and continues advancing toward the others. He then remembers Hegel's teachings and knows that, because he has little physical strength and endurance, he needs to end the fight quickly. When another intruder charges at him, the boy lowers himself and avoids the attack. Knowing that he cannot prolong the confrontation, he keeps his focus on piercing his opponent's vital points. He dodges the strike and moves beneath the enemy's guard, piercing his body before he can react. With that, he brings down another opponent in only 2 movements and continues advancing, determined to compensate for his limitations by improving the abilities he already possesses. Taking advantage of the natural flexibility of her body, she moves with agility and manages to attack from different positions and angles, catching her opponent by surprise. Using this mobility, Mary spins her body through the air, slips past her opponent's defense, and delivers a precise thrust into his throat. With the enemy fallen, Mary prepares to finish him off, but the remaining men retreat and tremble before her, beginning to see her as an insane killer. The training continues, with the young man repeatedly striking the tree until he falls to his knees. The master asks whether he has finally gotten rid of his doubts, and points out that, even after spending the entire day swinging the sword, his body still shows no true exhaustion. As proof, he points to the young man's sweat falling onto the ground, where the ants continue approaching it. The master explains that, with the strength he possesses now, the young man is already capable of defeating a group of 4 untrained bandits by himself. However, he emphasizes that this level is still not enough, and states that his true growth will happen in battles where his own life is at risk. The young man realizes that everything Master Liam had taught him was true. When the fight began, Mary's memories became clearer in his mind, and his body started responding to the movements with much greater agility. Because of that, he begins to understand a little better the heart and determination Mary needed in order to face the world. At that moment, the young man realizes that this was exactly the meaning behind Master Liam's teachings. He finally understands that becoming stronger means deepening his connection with the sword's former owner, realizing that this is the true power of absorbing a weapon. Master Liam then makes it clear that he never lies when the matter involves the sword. Master Liam warns that the coming days will be filled with suffering and that the trials will be so intense that the challenge he faced that day will seem insignificant by comparison. After revealing what awaits him, he asks whether the young man still intends to continue following this path. The young man clenches his fist and answers that he will follow any path necessary, as long as one day he can face Carlos and kill him. With his decision made, he reaffirms to his master that he will continue following his teachings. The training advances to a new stage, and the young man appears completely exhausted before Master Liam, even going so far as to question whether he is truly certain about this. Soon afterward, the two are standing before an enormous stone wall, where the master presents the next challenge. The young man discovers that the next challenge is to climb an enormous cliff and once again questions whether this is truly the correct path. Master Liam notices that his determination has given way to doubt, but recognizes that this suspicious side of him has always been part of his personality since childhood. Master Liam says that he will explain more about that in the future, but for now decides to pass on the knowledge the young man is seeking. He reveals that the path of a swordsman is divided into 5 stages, beginning with Sword Novice. Among them, the most talented can reach the level of Swordwalker, and those who continue developing their abilities until they take on a central role on the battlefield are called Sword Runners. Among Sword Runners, those capable of changing the course of a battle on their own are known as Sword Experts. Above them are the swordsmen revered like gods and who dominate all others, the Sword Masters, those who have awakened the sword heart. After explaining the final stage, Master Liam turns his attention back to the young man. Master Liam asks which of the 5 stages the young man believes he currently belongs to. Even though he imagines that his master might expect a more confident answer, he acknowledges that he knows his current level well. The explanation then continues. To become a swordmaster, it is necessary to learn how to control mana, which requires the formation of a second heart capable of storing it, known as the mana heart. The young man concludes that, because he has not yet awakened the mana heart, he has not even reached the level of sword novice. Master Liam praises his awareness of his own level and confirms that he is still only a beginner who has barely taken his first step as a swordsman. He then reveals that this training exists precisely to bring him to the level of sword novice by forming his mana heart. The young man becomes outraged when he realizes that he is literally risking his own life just to form a mana heart. Clinging to the cliff while the stone begins to loosen beneath his hand, he emphasizes that even the smallest mistake during this training could truly lead to his death. The young man comments that he does not know how this was done back in Master Liam's time, since nowadays it is possible to form a mana heart simply by drinking an alchemist's potion. Another option is to receive a mana transfer from a swordsman at the swordwalker level, a method that also allows someone to awaken the ability to sense mana. With these alternatives, even nobles who have barely learned how to defend themselves with a sword can easily awaken a mana heart. Unable to understand why he needs to go through such extreme training when much easier methods exist, the young man questions the need to continue this way. Master Liam admits that forming a mana heart is not a complicated process and that there would be no problem in using one of the common methods of the current era. Master Liam explains that the blood of Caravan possesses the powerful strength of steel, and that in order to fully make use of this extraordinary power, it is necessary to build a body resilient enough to withstand it. An ordinary body would not be capable of doing so, because with a normal mana heart, the young man would only be able to reach the limits of an ordinary person. Master Liam states that, if the young man truly intends to reach the level of Swordmaster, he will need to acquire a heart capable of withstanding all the forces in this world, the Steel Heart. Master Liam explains that there is only one way to form the Steel Heart, constantly subjecting one's own body to dangerous situations until it begins demanding the formation of a mana heart on its own. He reveals that even among his disciples, only a few managed to complete this training because of how extremely harsh and dangerous the process was. Master Liam reveals that every disciple who managed to complete this training eventually became a swordmaster. He then asks whether that information serves as motivation, and the young man replies that he is now more motivated than ever. Master Liam reaffirms that he never lies when the matter involves the sword, and guarantees that the mana heart awakened through this training will be unique. According to him, no one else will possess a heart like the one the young man will be able to form. The story then shifts to Campbell, a city in the eastern region. Inside a tavern, some residents talk about rumors involving the village of Caravan, located to the west, remembering that the place has been abandoned for around a year and wondering what could possibly be happening in that deserted land. The rumors claim that something mysterious exists in the village of Caravan and that, whatever it is, it seems to be dangerous, since every man who went there disappeared without ever sending word back. Among the stories circulating around, some claim that a wave of monsters survived the Northern Watchmen and destroyed the village, while others say that a dark mage is conducting experiments there. Despite the many stories spreading around, one thing is treated as certain: anyone who does not want to die should stay away from the village to the west. In the middle of the conversation, a hooded man hears that death awaits him in that place and, even while coughing up blood, considers the village an ideal destination. From that day onward, the young man begins hanging from the cliff using only his left hand. The training continues even after facing intruders until exhaustion and pushing his body to its limits through strength exercises, leaving his muscles overwhelmed by pain and reaching the point where he can barely move a single finger. Without taking even a single day of rest, the young man continues forcing himself to the absolute limit. And so the final month passes, with him enduring extremely difficult and dangerous training while waiting to discover whether he has finally managed to form his mana heart. In the end, he fails to form the mana heart as he expected. Even so, while looking at his own hand, he realizes that some kind of change is clearly taking place within his body. One of those changes becomes evident when a sphere attached to a chain shoots toward him. The young man follows the attack and manages to dodge at the very last moment, showing that his reflexes have become much faster. His senses had become far sharper, allowing him to follow and avoid several attacks in succession. The young man realizes that not only have his 5 senses improved, but other changes have also begun appearing within his body. In addition to his senses, his ability to evaluate each situation and maintain his focus has also reached a completely new level. Because of that, he manages to react to high-speed attacks and dodge them at exactly the right moment. Concentrating his entire body into a single point while holding the needle in his hand, the young man realizes that his perception has expanded, making everything around him appear much clearer as he faces the attacks. His perception reaches the point where everything around him seems completely motionless, as though time itself has frozen. Taking advantage of that opening, the young man moves between the attacks and manages to strike his opponent with the needle. After hitting his opponent, the young man realizes just how much he has evolved compared to before. To him, there is only one explanation for such tremendous progress. He can finally sense mana. Master Liam recognizes that although the young man has still not formed his mana heart or reached the level of sword novice, the progress he has achieved is already impressive. He attributes much of that result to the reinforcement provided by the needle, but still considers the young man's growth surprising. The young man asks his master what he will be capable of once he reaches the next stage of his development. Liam realizes that he is already impressed by his own progress and reminds him that he is still only a beginner, but decides to answer anyway. Once he awakens his mana heart and truly understands the depth of that power as a sword novice, his level will advance even further. Master Liam explains that once the young man awakens the mana heart and becomes a sword novice, he will reach the same level as the former owner of the needle. By taking one more step, he will reach the stage of Swordwalker, where he will be able to enhance his physical attributes and establish his own domain for both attack and defense through the path created by his mana heart. Master Liam explains that the Swordwalker stage comes immediately after Sword Novice, and that, when the young man faces someone at that level, he will quickly understand the size of the difference between them. Satisfied with the explanation, the young man takes the opportunity to ask another question based on what he has been sensing recently. The young man concludes that, if his perception is correct, the intruder who recently settled in the village is a Swordwalker. The scene then shows the man camped among the ruins, surrounded by mana, while remaining near the campfire. Master Liam confirms that the intruder is on a completely different level from the enemies they have faced so far, and warns that, in his current state, the young man would be defeated in less than a second. Even so, he decides to observe the situation and prepare for the worst, stating that he never had any other choice. Liam then asks whether he could not simply abandon that place and avoid a battle with no chance of victory. The young man states that abandoning that place is not an option. Even after so much time has passed since his lands became completely desolate, Caravan remains the only place where he can remember the days he spent beside everyone. Master Liam tells the young man that he needs to become strong, because in the Iron Kingdom, strength itself is the law. He acknowledges that clinging to the memories of that place is natural, but makes it clear that this kind of feeling is a luxury he cannot afford to have. Master Liam instructs the young man to preserve those feelings and transform them into motivation to obtain what he desires. He must endure the trials that are still to come, harden himself like steel, and become strong enough that no one can ever disregard his words. The young man then recognizes that his master probably knew very well what he was talking about. The intruder launches his attack with his sword wrapped in mana, but the young man remains standing before him and warns him not to try to run away. He makes it clear that if the man turns his back on him, he will attack immediately. The intruder warns that he will bring the young man down in a single instant. Faced with an opponent far superior to him, he realizes that he has ended up confronting a trial capable of putting his training to the test. The former owner of the needle was known as the Needle Maiden, a name that had become more famous than she herself had imagined. Because of that reputation, mercenary groups began searching for her frequently, trying to recruit her into their ranks. At the same time, some bandits also began seeking her out after hearing about her fame, challenging her to fights. Because of this, Mary realized that she could leave behind the reputation of being a frail mercenary who used a sword resembling a needle. Mary began to see the possibility of becoming a truly powerful swordswoman and reaching new heights. However, it did not take long for that confidence to be put to the test when a warrior appeared before her and confirmed that he was standing in front of the famous Needle Maiden. The warrior states that the title Needle Maiden suits someone who fights using such a weak blade, and says that Mary had been deceiving herself by believing she was skilled. He then grabs her and treats her as nothing more than an insignificant mercenary with a burned face. The warrior claims that Mary was nothing more than someone he could have crushed easily and that she was only still alive because she was a woman. He reveals that he belongs to the Order of the Red Falcon, whose rules forbid its members from killing women and children, and walks away while telling her that she should be grateful for having been spared. That day, Mary felt for the first time the enormous difference in power between herself and the knight. Later, she would discover that the level of swordsmanship that man had reached was known as Swordwalker. In Mary's memories, she was far stronger than she is now, and even then, she was defeated without any difficulty by a Swordwalker. Now, standing before that man, she realizes that the difference is even greater than anything she had ever felt while training on the cliff, and what is approaching is the sensation of imminent death. Faced with that threat, he notices his heart beating faster and faster, and begins wondering whether this might be the reason all of this is happening. Then, as he concentrates his attention, he finally manages to see something. What he begins to see is the superhuman domain achieved only by swordwalkers or even higher-level warriors, where mana is released from the body as though it were flowing through their veins, allowing it to be imbued into both attack and defense through sheer force of will. After finally seeing the path of a swordwalker, he prepares to face the intruder and asks why the man has been observing his movements, suspecting that he might also be responsible for the disappearances that have occurred throughout the lands he visits. He demands a convincing explanation so he can decide whether the man is an ally or an enemy. The intruder claims that he was born and raised in that place, but explains that when he returned after spending around a year away, he found everyone gone and the village completely destroyed, possibly due to the actions of some dark mage. Since then, barbarians and thieves have begun invading the area, forcing the man to eliminate them in order to keep the village safe. Because of that, he explains that he began observing Liam, because his strength seemed far greater than that of the other intruders, knowing that he could die if he approached him without caution. For that reason, the man continued observing Liam until he could discover his true intentions. If he turned out to be friendly, he intended to suggest that they become neighbors, but if he proved to be a threat, he was willing to face him even without any chance of victory, because that land was his home, and held all the memories he still possessed. To the man, that place was far too precious to abandon. Upon hearing this, Liam understands his attachment to those lands, and the stranger realizes that the young lord also seems to have gone through great hardships. Liam decides that he should also share a little about himself, since the two of them may end up becoming neighbors. He then asks the man to lower his guard and his sword, promising to do the same so they can talk. His master's words return to his mind, reminding him that the only way to achieve the steel heart is to constantly place himself in danger until his own body is forced to awaken a mana heart. Faced with that situation, he begins to understand the purpose of this training more clearly. Even so, Liam refuses to lower his sword, explaining that he still does not completely trust the man and needs to keep it ready to defend himself. The stranger simply responds that if he truly wanted to attack him, that sword would be useless. The man explains that with both of them holding their swords, his honor as a knight prevents him from being the first to lower his weapon. Even knowing this, Liam refuses to back down, because he had made a promise to himself after an experience from his past. Liam had sworn to himself that he would never again kneel before an enemy out of fear, nor would he ever give up fighting before he had even raised his sword.